And so it was just a very intense competition. And they called us and they said, look, like, we're going to launch in your market. And they were bigger than us at the time. And they're like, if you don't sell to us today, I mean, then this is your last chance. Like, we're going to come and crush you. And for me, that's just motivation. That's like, okay, well, let's go.
Today on Challenger X, we're thrilled to welcome Dan Park, an inspiring leader who's redefining the Canadian automotive industry as the CEO of Clutch, Canada's largest online car retailer. Before Clutch, he was instrumental in the explosive growth of Uber Eats Canada, helping to establish the platform as a household name. Dan's journey reflects a relentless commitment to innovation, and he's here to share insights on scaling for hypergrowth, leading through industry shifts, and creating value in unexpected ways. So let's welcome Dan Park.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Now, Dan, Clutch has made a lot of noise in the industry. You've been around. You have done a lot of work in helping the car buying process become easier for Canadians. Walk me through the origins of Clutch, how you got here, and how did it all start?
I met Steve, who was the founder of Clutch, back in 2019, and he had just started the business about a year and a half before that. And at the time I was at Uber Eats delivering food, and he said, hey, want to deliver cars instead? So we started talking, and what really got me excited was the fact that in Canada, there was no brand for used car retail. And so if you go to the US, there's folks like CarMax and Carvana. And for most consumer goods that you buy every day, whether it's shoes or a TV, there's somewhere you go, right? If you want to buy a TV, you'll go to Best Buy or Walmart or Costco. If you want to buy some shoes, you go to Foot Locker or online to Zappos. But for used cars in Canada, it's still very fragmented, and there's no experience that's consistent across the country. And so you don't know, it's a transaction and it's a purchase that's pretty complicated, and there's no quality standard for that product. And so what we wanted to do, and what got me really excited, was the fact that this didn't exist in Canada, and it felt like it was a product that needed to exist. And because of how complicated, and because how consumers these days want to actually purchase items, it felt like there needed to be a modernization. And so that's how we got started. And we started, Steve started the idea out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, because he's from Ottawa originally, but Ontario didn't want to give him a license to sell cars online. The MVDA, which is the Motor Vehicle Dealers Act, was written in 2002, which, given your background, you know. Yeah. And that was before the advent of the iPhone, right? And so the idea of selling a car online was very foreign. And so the only province within a direct flight of Toronto that allowed for car sales online was Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. And so he moved there, first time ever being in Nova Scotia, started the business there. And then I joined, and if we wanted to build a big venture scale business, then you need to be outside of Halifax. And so we started the process to try to launch Toronto. And so we worked with regulators. We finally got a license in January 2020, and then pandemic happened.
What a great story. You had a very impressive career before Clutch. You were spearheading Uber Eats and really bringing it to Canada. You were the leader on the ground, really redefining delivery. So what made you want to jump to this risky venture? What was your thought process?
If there's no risk, there's no reward, I guess. But I mean, even at Uber, when I joined Uber Eats, it was still, I would say, somewhat of a risky venture from a career perspective. Uber was just starting its food delivery business, or even experimenting. It wasn't even called Uber Eats back then. It was called Uber Everything, which meant everything except for rides. And the way that it worked back then was that we'd fill a bunch of cars with some sandwiches or some pad thais. They would drive around. You would order it from the Rides app and say, instead of ordering a Uber X or a Uber whatever Black, you'd order food, and then you'd choose from like 4 menu items, and one of those 4 menu items would show up at your door. That was it. That was the initial. And so we would actually show up to parking lots. There was there's 4 around the city. We'd fill them up with, we'd like invite a bunch of drivers to show up. We'd fill them up with food, and they would drive around. And one day the driver would come back in an hour and be like, "Oh, well, I sold out of my sandwiches." And then other drivers by the end of the day be like, "I have 15 pad thais left." And so we were eating pad thai for dinner at an office. And so that was like the first iteration. And then the rides business really didn't like it because we're a two-sided marketplace, demand and supply. The supply in Uber is the drivers. And if the drivers are driving food around, they're not driving people around, right? And so the overall business didn't like Uber Eats. So we were like shunned in the corner and the black sheep of the company. And if you ever want to make a group of people feel not important, on a town hall, you call the core business core, and then you call the non-core. And so it was non-core. It was like, how's the core business doing and how's the non-core business doing? And so, I think there was a long time at the beginning we were like, is this going to work? This was back when Travis Kalanick was still in the CEO of Uber. And, it was his brainchild. It was like, let's go see what else we can deliver in cars. In that first year, I think we burned something like $400 million.
Wow.
And so, he came to the table and was like, hey, look, like, what are you guys doing? Like at some point, someone needs to prove to me that this actually is a real business. And so that was like, there was certainly moments of existential crisis, even back then. And so, in some ways I feel like I got a stomach for it, moving over to an online car sales model. And, I think, I knew that the product was going to be good. And for any, for the audience here is obviously business folks, but, when you've got a really great product, I think building a business around that becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, I think your ability to translate your experiences from Uber Eats to Clutch is obviously evident in the success of Clutch. Now, when you went to Clutch, you're moving into a very entrenched industry of car dealerships and a lot of formidable players. And I'm sure you got a lot of resistance in those early days and challenges from every direction. Can you talk about how you dealt with those and what those were?
I think there's certainly a subset of dealers that are our partners and that like us, and then there's certainly a subset of dealers that do not like us. And again, like the way we think about it is how do we control our own destiny? And so the way we acquire our vehicles are from folks like you and I. We put offers on vehicles and we acquire them on Clutch's behalf. And then we put them through this really intensive reconditioning process that creates an amazing product in terms of a used car. And then we sell them on our website in a really seamless manner. So that's kind of the business model. And so we don't really rely on partners. We do have some partners, but we don't rely on them as the core of our business. And so that's how we navigate some of the challenges. We work closely with regulators to make sure that we're obviously on board with all the regulations, and so that's been a big important part of our business as well. But ultimately, we focus on the customer, and I think when you focus on the customer and you deliver a product that the customer wants, the rest is really just noise.
Oh, great. So we were talking earlier, and you mentioned when you started there was one other competitor.
Yes.
And you got this great story about the challenge you got from the competitor.
Yeah.
So tell me about that and how you as the CEO dealt with that and how you overcame that.
Business and building companies is a competition. It's a game in many ways, right? And there's winners and there's losers. And at that time, back in 2021, 2022, there was so much because of low interest rate capital environment. There was so much funding, particularly for growth stage companies, and the focus for a lot of those investors at the time was about growth, right? The faster you grew, the more money you'd attract, the faster you would grow. And so it was this kind of perpetual cycle that you needed to be on that hamster wheel. Otherwise, if you weren't if you were growing slower than your competitor, you're not going to attract the dollars. And so at the time, we had a competitor that they raised a bunch of money, we raised a bunch of money. They were launching markets, we were launching markets, and it was intense. It reminded me actually of my Uber Lyft days. Uber and Lyft, intense competitors. From when I was at Eats, it was like us and Skip the Dishes. Like that was like the real competition. And so I love it. It also just fuels the team. You want to make sure that they know that you're competing, and you kind of vilify the competitor. I hate them. Turns out they're actually pretty nice guys. But I never met them until relatively recently. I'm like, hey, you're actually a nice guy, but your company, I hate you, right? So that's the I think the spirit of it. And so it was just a very intense competition. And they called us and they said, look, like we're going to launch in your market, like now or never. And they were bigger than us at the time. And they're like, if you don't sell to us today, I mean, this is your last chance. Like we're going to come and crush you. And for me, that's just motivation. That's like, okay, well, let's go, right? Like you've put up a challenge. This will be fun. And we were raising money, and the investors like, are you going to win? Are they going to win? Who's going to be the ultimate winner? Because a lot of these marketplace businesses are winner take all, or winner take most at least. And so that was kind of the bulk of my 2021, and then shortly thereafter in 2023, they filed for bankruptcy, and so the answer of who was going to win, at least again, there's a lot more to do, and at least in that small microcosm of those couple of years, it was a nice victory, but again, that was something to hang your hat on, but maybe like now move forward.
Awesome. What a great story. Let's talk about your customers. Now, you built this whole company around a vision that car buying could be a hassle-free environment experience for customers. How do you keep the customer at the center of everything you guys do and build, and how you operate?
Yeah, I think as leaders, you can only really do that through leading by example. And so we have this. We use Slack internally. You guys use Slack internally to communicate, and we've built an integration with Google where we get every review that ever comes on any of our locations immediately delivered to the entire company. And so we see every single review. We have like 4,000 or 5,000 reviews at this point.
Right.
And so every day we'll get at least a couple dozen reviews. And anytime there's a 1-star, right? And it's rare, but anytime there's a 1-star, we will go, like I personally will go in there, message the team and be like, hey, what happened here? Like, did we do something wrong? Is this on us? There's also customers that, so there's some customers, you can't make everyone happy. There's some customers that, it wasn't our fault. But if it was, like, let's go dig in. Let's figure out exactly what went wrong, right? Let's call that customer, apologize, make things right. And so we will do that for every single customer. And we get that feedback instantaneously. Right. And I will go in there, and the team knows that I read every single one of those reviews. And so that's like part of our insane customer focus. At the same time, Steve, who's the founder, will go on Reddit personally and spend a couple hours every week answering people on Reddit, and it's under his real name, Steve Seibel at Reddit, and he will go and actually engage in discussion with the Reddit community around car buying process, answering questions. It'll do that fully organically, and people love it. It's great access, and they can speak to ask real questions, and people think it's actually fake, but it's actually really him. Right. It's truly him. It's truly him. We don't have a team. We don't have people. It's truly him that is answering these questions. And so I don't know if that scales over time. And this is the classic Brian Chesky Airbnb thing, right? Like you got to do stuff that doesn't scale. I don't know if I'm going to be able to read every single review, but for now, that's what we're doing. Right. And I'd hope to do that for a really long time because it is so important. What
a great example for a hands-on CEO. Now, as CEO of a high-growth company in a very exciting industry, you're probably wearing a lot of hats, right? Tell me, how do you keep yourself motivated, and how do you keep your team, your leadership team, aligned with chasing that mission?
Yeah. We try to make it fun, and I think for a lot of the team, One, we get the benefit that people that love cars really love cars, right? And so they're really passionate about cars. And if you love cars, Clutch is a pretty great place to work.
Yep.
And the product we deliver is truly, truly great. And I think, unlike some other consumer purchases, whether it's your shoes or a TV, a bad car purchase can be really bad for a customer's credit, can be bad for their financial health overall. There's so many times that I've heard stories where a customer gets put into a car where they've overpaid by $5,000 or whatever because they only looked at the payments, for example. And so we deliver a really transparent process and purchase experience so that there are no surprises and that you're getting a fair price, and so you know exactly what you're getting yourself into. And so I think that's where, we see that feedback coming online, and that's really, again, we talk about these reviews and all this feedback from customers, and all of it being so positive really motivates the team and says, okay, we're actually making a difference in terms of this person's life by putting them and helping them get a car that really fits what they need, and with full transparency and full confidence that it's gonna be a good purchase for them. And so that's that. I think, again, a lot of what we'll talk about is the product itself and the experience. And so that's our focus, and that's what our North Star is to make sure that we're delivering a really great product.
That's great. And you guys are obviously using a lot of data.
Yeah.
We talked about the early days when data was on spreadsheets, and now you're into machine learning and AI. Just talk to me about that journey, about how you started to see the power of data, and then where is data going? Where is AI going from your lens? Because you're in a very unique industry, very powerful industry. Where do you see AI kind of taking us?
Yeah. If you reflect back on even how people would value cars back 5 years ago or even 10 years ago, it was usually a guy with a notepad that would walk around and be like, I think this is this price. Like, it was very much, off the cuff, from the gut. Today, access to data, access to online listings, access to data you can purchase is not infinite, but it's very, very big, right? And so we can take that, but to be able to process that and to be able to analyze that on a weekly or daily basis with humans is very expensive and almost impossible. This is where I think this is where AI can really be helpful. And what we've done is we built machine learning models for each make model of vehicle so that we can take the data that we've either purchased or our internal data and then spit out a really accurate market price for that vehicle.
Right.
And we can do that on a real-time basis at scale. And so today we send about 120,000 of those offers out, or those prices to consumers out every week. Really hard to do that. A lot of humans would have to be able to be at computers trying to do that. And so that's where we've leveraged and harnessed data. And when I think about what happens in the next 5 to 10 years, I think we haven't even scratched the surface around the use cases for AI. And I think people obviously know ChatGPT and some of these other tools, but we're in in terms of consumer adoption, year 2 or 3.
Right.
And so if you think about what consumer adoption for the internet was in year 2 or 3, which was like the late 90s, early 2000s, right? Like, the use cases for every other, back then, the use cases for the internet were a fraction of what they actually are, because we haven't even imagined what those use cases are. And so I think I draw that analogy to AI because, sure, there's a few use cases. You can automate like customer interactions. But like some of the video technologies, I think in 5 years, we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce a TV commercial, right? I think you can do that for a couple $1,000s in a couple of years, because all of that can be AI generated, right? So I think there's going to be incredible cost savings. I think there's going to be some really interesting use cases, but I couldn't even tell you what that is or what those will be, because, if you and I were sitting here having this conversation back in, 1999 or 2000 and talking about what the potential things for the internet would be, I don't know. I wouldn't have said that you can order ride sharing on an app.
Absolutely. It's quite reminiscent of those years when, nobody imagined and it was coupled with a lot of fear. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Certainly in banking, no one ever thought people would, disclose their information for online banking at the time.
Yeah. And the same fear exists now too, right? Because human beings generally don't like the unknown, right? When you're walking around the woods and you hear a noise in the bush, you're not like, oh, what's that, right? Your human beings want to run away, or they don't like uncertainty, right? They're programmed to shy away from risk.
Mm-hmm. A business is only as good as its leadership team and its team.
Yeah.
What do you look for in your team? What are the skill sets you're looking for?
I've got an incredible team. We've been together through the ups and the downs. Trust is the foundation, I think, of good teams, right? We're very into sports analogy. I'm very into sports analogies, and we like sports as a good point of comparison to building sports teams as comparison to building executive teams. You talk about the commentators at like ESPN or whatever. They talk about championship teams, and they talk about a lot about the trust and what the team has gone through in order to be able to get to a championship level. I think that's the most important thing, and you build trust by going through some of these experiences together, but also sharing strategies, making sure that information is being freely shared amongst individuals, setting very clear priorities and roles of what your job and what your mandate is, holding people accountable to those. And so for that, I think you want people that fit into that culture. I think there's great people that certainly would be amazing in other organizations that might not be great in our organization. And so I think having that fit with what we're trying to build is probably the most important thing. And so it's people with low ego. It's people that, obviously the simple things like working hard and showing up, but it's being able to be creative. So there's a whole host of characteristics, but the most important thing is obviously the fit within the team.
Awesome. Well, my last question to you is, we're looking into the future now.
Okay.
Your business is 5 years out. Where do you want it to be? And I want you to tell me, what are the new rules for business? Like, what should we be thinking about into the future?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. So in the next 5 to 10 years, I think for us, we want to be able to continue to maintain that quality of customer experience, to make sure that we're delivering the same product then as we are today, but do that across a national footprint. We want every Canadian to have access and at least know about the option to buy a car from Clutch or sell a car to Clutch. And so when it comes to business, I think that's the ultimate goal. We want to be the most trusted brand for used car selling and buying in this country. And again, trust being that imperative word. And then what are the new rules? I think consumers have so many options these days. And back when my parents were buying a sofa, you would go into the store and be like, you can have that sofa or that sofa, and that was it. Now you can customize it, you can have it delivered, you can get it imported, you can choose from 16,000 different types of sofas. And so the abundance of choice today, I think, is significantly, exponentially more than it was back in our parents' time and our childhoods, obviously. And so maintaining that quality of experience and maintaining that, it's just a much more competitive world. And so, and I think as leaders and business leaders, there's, so many things, I think there's so many situations where you've had leaders that have destroyed companies, and usually it's because, they've strayed away from some of those core ethics, right? And so I think doing the right thing, being kind to people, right, and helping people and be supportive in people's careers along the way, ultimately compounds to something great. And so I think one of our core values is about focusing on the fundamentals. Just doing the basics gets you most of the way. Great
way to end the episode. Dan Park, honored to have you.
Absolutely.
And thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Take care.